Airbus has a big problem. They're popular. The lineup of the A320neo is about to face a major hiccup. But this hiccup is so important that even airlines around the world are currently left biting their fingers in anxiety about the consequences for the aviation industry could be huge. And it's because of one little concern with their engines. So what is the concern with the A320 new engines? Stick around till the end of the video to find out if you have been watching our videos, and most likely, you've already heard of the Airbus A320 family. They're one of Airbus's most successful lineup and have inspired subsequent lineups like the A318, A319, and A321. The A320 family are super efficient. While the earlier versions were either powered with the CFM56 engines, the V250 from CFM International, the International AO engines, and the PW6000 from Pratt & Whitney. However, a new engine option for the A320 lineup was launched in 2010, and they came with the more recent LEAP 1A engines from CFM International and PW1000G from Pratt & Whitney. These engines were supposed to bring in some extra efficiency and performance, which they did, but now there is a small problem, and it concerns the Pratt & Whitney PW1000 engines. You see Pratt and Whitney use gear turbofans for their PW1000 engines. And we hear you thinking, all right, but what of it? Well, this is important to know because compared to conventional turbofans like their PW6000, the gear turbofan engine has a reduction gearbox installed between the fan and low-pressure turbine. What this means is that the fan can rotate slower, so they burn less fuel and produce less sound, and they also require fewer parts than the regular turbofans. It's a pretty ingenious piece of engineering. So the purpose of these engines was to bring the pre-station for the Pratt & Whitney jets to the next level. But on the 26th of this July, something shocking happened. Pratt & Whitney announced that close to 1,200 of their 3,000 geared turbofan engines would have to be recalled for inspection. Apparently, Pratt & Whitney have discovered that there are tiny cracks that are being formed on their high-press turbine discs due to a rare condition with the powdered metal used to make them. This crack danger follows durability. Difficulties that have previously observed with the geared turbofan engines and even contributed to 11% of geared turbofan powered A320 aircraft to be parked today. Now, this issue has especially affected Airbus. Has up to 40% of their A320 neo lineup is powered by Pratt & Whitney gear turbofan engines, but they aren't going to be the only ones affected. You see, a whopping 57 airlines around the world use the A320neo in some way, and this contributes to issue a global one, which could have a significant impact on aviation as a whole industry right now. About 200 of Pratt the GTF engines from Whitney had to be inspected and returned since July, but they expect a further 1,000 to be inspected for September 2024. And this could end up grounding up to 650 aircraft around the world in the first half of next 2024. This number makes up almost half of the 1,360 A320NE aircraft powered by the GTF engines. This is especially difficult as the impact it would have on airlines is huge, given that the peak would be a part of this summer travel season. So a lot of affected airlines have a chance of losing tens of millions of dollars if they're unable to replace the capacity they add airlines or replacement engines. However, Pratt & Whitney have reassured airlines that the engines in current production are untouched by this problem. In fact, only affect the GTF engines manufactured between late 2015 and mid-2021. So that's some reset for airlines whose A320neos make use of the fresher PW1100G engines. In response to the news about the recall, the Federal Aviation Administration said they were aware of the issue and intend to take the appropriate steps to come to a solution with both Pratt & Whitney and the affected U.S. operators. Pratt & Whitney are trying to work through the problem as quickly as they can so as to mitigate the inevitable impact this recall would see. Airlines, they've been increasing their 13-person capacity maintenance facilities to improve the speed of inspection of engines. And they've also kept several of their newly manufactured engines on standby just in case spares are needed. However, inspection and potential repairs are still expected to take over 250 days or just over 8 months, which in aviation terms is a gargantuan amount of time, especially financially. Shockingly, This issue of cracks in the turbine discs is just the latest in a line of issues Pratt & Whitney have been facing with their geared turbofan engines, as earlier Indian ultra-low-cost carrier in the Urgo first claimed that the poor reliability of their PW1000G engines had ultimately caused them to suspend their operations. Pratt & Whitney's parent company Rayon Technologies, or RTX, have stated that while the issue is not a big threat, rectification of the problem could prove to be expensive. However, they did also add that the affected airlines would be compensated, be it in form of discounts or swapping the affected engines that respond with temporary ones. To the news of engine recalls on July 25th, RTX's share price dropped by over 11%. This was despite posting a second quarter of $1.3 billion. But as a result of this problem, the company said that they expect at least $500 million to be wiped from their profits, as they intend to fix the problem with their engines. To say that this is a massive problem is an understatement, and it's clear that Pratt & Whitney got their work cut out for them. But what about the airlines? Well, the CEO of Airbus, Gollum Furry, was asked about the situation at an aerospace. What he said at the Washington summit was pretty grim. He said that there will be a lot of consequences on the airline industry. When asked about the situation, RTEC have determined that the issues could affect up to 3,000 engines, with between 600 and 700 estimated to be in need of a possible repair. And this means trouble for everybody that you see. The affected aircraft will be grounded during repairs, and the process involves the removal of the engines from the wings, which require as much time as possible. Imagine it's most likely that the process is going to be ongoing through to 2026, as the majority of inspections and repairs will begin from 2024, and this will significantly affect the airline industry. For instance, the CEO of Lufthansa, who was also at the Aerospace Summit, said the recalls were going to have a significant impact on their operations, as well as on other people working with the Pratt & Whitney geared turbofans. Lufthansa expects close to 20 of its A320 Neo aircraft to be grounded across 2024, but they intend to mitigate the capacity loss by extending the lives of the older A320 aircraft, as well as wet leasing narrow-body aircraft from other less affected airlines. But this is a solution Lufthansa can follow through with due to the size of their fleet as well as their available resources. But less airlines are expected to be much more affected by this development. For an example of a genius European discount, Airline Air operates on all Airbus narrow-body fleet, so it had to cut its capacity growth forecast from 30% to 25% over the next 2 quarters. And they're not the only ones. Other smaller airlines such as JetBlue Airways, Frontier Airlines, and Indigo have all confirmed that the GTF engine inspections would affect them for the next 12 months at least. But Spirit Airlines is unrivaled. They're expected to be one of the airlines most affected by the inspection, as they currently operate 8 A320 Neo aircraft now. Spirit, as well as other operators who are affected, are being forced to sour spare parts and engines to avoid flight disruptions, and this could have a huge domino effect on the rest of the timing, and the aviation industry couldn't come at worse time. The issue with Pratt & Whitney's geared turbofan engines comes at a time where the demand for air travel and by default aircraft has seen a massive boom. The carriers are very fond of the A320 Neo around the world, and its grounding over the next few years may set off a chain reaction effect that could lead to massive disruptions across the aviation sector. Airlines, especially the smaller ones that are most affected, would probably have to raise prices on their available aircraft to continue competing. In this turn gives an advantage to airlines who operate competing aircraft like the Boeing 737 MAXs, as well as lending the larger affected airlines an upper hand over smaller ones when it comes to mitigating the inevitable losses. Normally, it could be possible for some airlines to stall on sending their aircraft for inspection because of RX's claims that the cracking of the turbine discs currently pose no threat. But even though it may not be a threat right now, years of wear and tear could easily lead to major damage to the discs, which in certain circumstances could end up being fatal. So despite the financial repercussions, it's probably better the affected airlines to submit to the inspections and prevent even graver damage further down the line. What do you think about the new issue with Pratt Whitney's GTF engines, and how do you think it impacts the global aviation sector? Would you mind sharing your thoughts in the comments below?